On this prequel episode, we have our interview with the vampire follow-up polls, and we've got some spooky recommendations for you to watch and read. Hello and welcome back to This Film Is Lit, the prequel episode. We have a lot more listeners as of late. Has increased quite a bit. We're already doing okay, but we've got a lot of new listeners, potentially, these prequel episodes. We set up, we do a little follow-up, bookkeeping, housekeeping for the old episode. With our follow-up, we hear your comments, so if you go and follow us on social media, comment, vote in our polls for which you prefer, the book or the movie. We'll kind of go through some of the comments we got. We don't read every single one of them on here, but we'll go through some of we'll usually at least mention everybody that kind of leaves a comment. If we get big enough and we have hundreds of comments, obviously we won't be able to. But right now we get, a dozen or so, and we kind of go through and get everybody a little shout out for giving their feedback, which we always love to hear. And then usually we do a learning things segment in these episodes. We don't have one this week because we're not particularly sure what movie we're going to end up / book we're going to end up doing for our next episode because it's still a little up in the air. We want to do spooky stories.
Scary stories to tell in the dark.
Scary stories to tell in the dark. We're not 100% positive that we're going to be able to get the movie of that yet. It should be out.
It's finding a lot of conflicting things.
It sounds like the digital download
sources that I can't verify.
It sounds like the digital download should be out tomorrow or today, the 22nd, I think.
Yeah.
So we'll double check on that. But if not, we have some other options. So we're going to figure that out. So instead of a normal learning things segment or a normal preview, we'd also then normally preview the book and the movie, kind of some fun facts and stuff. Instead of doing that, we have, since it is the spooky season, we have a top 5, not necessarily top 5. We have 5 recommendations of spooky things to read. Katie does, and I have 5 recommendations of spooky things to watch. And we're going to kind of go through those and give you some of our recommendations if you're looking for something fun and spooky for this time of year. But first, we're going to do our follow-up polls. Katie, what one?
The book one.
I noticed that.
Yeah.
Which is weird because all the comments say they prefer the movie. Not all the comments.
We had one person ride to the defense of the book.
In the comments. But
in the actual polls, the book won.
And we didn't have a ton of votes, but we had enough to, swing it. To make it pretty decisive. It was 78% on Twitter, not to jump too far ahead. The book won 78-22 on Twitter and 57-43, which I think is one vote. One vote on Facebook.
On Facebook.
So it was pretty even on Facebook, relatively, but it won pretty handily on Twitter.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because it kind of seemed like people preferred the book, but didn't feel passionately enough about it
to defend it in the comments or say why.
Tell me why.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw that too. But we do have some comments. So what do people have to say?
All right. Well, over on Facebook, I'm just going to read part of Daryl's comment because it's pretty long. Daryl said, after reading the book and watching the movie for the first time in the late 90s, I swore I would never, ever subject myself to them again. While reading Anne Rice's prose, I could just see her sitting behind her keyboard with a smug little smirk, muttering, "Damn, that's good writing." Which, I don't disagree with.
Okay, fair enough.
Some of the prose is maybe a little pretentious.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of on board with that imagining of Anne Rice writing.
Yeah.
And ultimately he said, in the end, I voted for the movie because kid vampires are creepy and Kirsten Dunst fucking nailed it.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I was if you listen to the main episode, a big praise for Kirsten Dunst. Kirsten Dunst.
And Eric, also on Facebook, said, it took me months to get through the book. There are some good ideas, but the prose and the constant suffering on Louis' part just makes it a slog. I voted for the movie because at least it's fun to watch and all its ridiculously campy glory.
I agree with that.
Yeah, and that was kind of similar to how I felt about the book.
That seemed like your experience watching it, or for me watching you read.
Yeah.
We didn't watch this one together because of scheduling stuff, so I didn't see how you enjoyed it. You said you enjoyed it, but I did get to see you reading at times, and it definitely seemed like it was more of a slog than some things. You definitely had to stop and start quite a bit.
Yeah. There was a lot of good stuff, but a lot of it was just kind of there was a lot of stuff that was kind of overwrought, in my opinion, and then a lot of like material that felt kind of like filler, in my opinion. And if I hadn't had to read it quickly for this episode, it probably would have taken me months to get through, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
So it was a bit of a slog for me as well.
Go. Okay. What do we hear? What were we hearing on Twitter?
All right. So on Twitter, we had a comment from April Admansky, who joined us for the Holes episode.
Yes. One of the 3 hosts of No Such Thing as a Bad Movie podcast.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she said, I haven't read the book, but I consider this film a career best for Pitt, Cruise, and Dunst. Mm-hmm. So there's that. At DC, or at Marvel DC Fanboy, which is Peter Parker is Lit, who comments on a lot of our stuff.
Yes.
So if you're following us on Twitter, you'll see him a lot.
Frequent commenter.
Yes. He said, definitely the movie. Tom Cruise as a sexy vampire. So, I think that's a good reason to like the movie.
That's fair.
Tom Cruise as a vampire.
Yeah, and Brad Pitt.
Yeah.
I mean, you got both.
Yeah. And then at Monty Light, which was our one person who came to the defense of the book.
Went to bat for the book in the comments, yeah.
He said, I prefer the book. The layers Anne Rice captured in her exploration of the Claudia character, drawing so well from her own real-life tragedy, was a level of writing I don't think she's ever quite replicated again. The movie is more of a straightforward mood piece, not as soulful.
I don't know how to compare it, but I got a lot of layers out of Claudia, out of the movie in general, but even specifically Claudia, just, again, purely as a movie watcher, I got a fair amount of layers, but I can't compare it, obviously. So.
Well, I did prefer the movie, but I agree with this assessment of the book as well. I think Claudia is a very layered character. I think it's obvious that Anne Rice drew from her own experiences. I haven't read any of her other work, but from what I've heard of some of it, I think the assessment that it's on a different level from some of her other stuff could be correct.
Yeah.
And I also think, in regard to the character of Claudia in the movie, I think that we might owe a lot of that to Kirsten Dunst.
Yeah.
Acting chops.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
She's not in it a ton. I mean, she's in it a fair amount in the middle, but there's a lot before she shows up, and then after. No, not a lot after, but some,
Yeah, there's some after.
So yeah, I can see that.
We also got, I want to mention, a lot of feedback from Mr. Nobody, at no bod there.
No _bod _ there.
On Twitter, and then also from Ashley with an I on Instagram. Got some feedback from them with their takes on various elements from the book and the movie that we discussed in the episode. Not really like I preferred one or the other kind of feedback. Yeah, more like expanding on the lore of the Anne Rice literary universe.
Yeah. If you're interested in more about this, go check out. It's another good reason to go check out our Twitter and our Instagram. If you scroll back not too far, you'll
Instagram that was private messages, so you can't check those
sorry,
out.
I didn't realize. Okay. But on Twitter, you can go and Mr. Nobody had a thread of tweets replying to one of our recent tweets about the movie. I don't remember if it was the poll or if it was. One of them.
Well, yeah.
You'll see him, and he's got a bunch of interesting stuff in there. So.
Right. And a lot of it was kind of like offering insight based on other books from the series, which obviously neither of us have read, so we couldn't really comment on. Yeah. And it's always nice to get that kind of stuff, especially when it is like such an expansive like lore.
Yeah. Yeah,
we can't really comment as to like, what's Lestat up to in his book? We don't know.
Yeah.
Why didn't he get his own movie? We don't know.
Yeah. Cool. All right. That was it for our follow-up and our feedback from everybody. Thank you. We really appreciate it. And like I said, we'll always read your stuff and hear what you have to say on these prequel episodes. So go ahead and follow us on all that social media. But now we have 5 spooky things to read and 5 spooky things to watch if you're looking for something fun this Halloween season.
So I've got spooky things to read. you've got spooky things to watch. Bit of a disclaimer. Mine is not counting stuff that we've done for the podcast.
Okay.
Like
mine also doesn't
books
have anything
that we've already talked about, because if I was counting that, Coraline would be on this list.
Yeah.
But you can always go back and listen to our Coraline episode to find out all of my thoughts on that. Also, another disclaimer, I don't read a ton of horror, and I know you don't watch a ton of horror.
That would be my disclaimer for my movie recommendations.
Yeah.
I'm not a big horror buff. There's tons of people out there on the internet that are huge horror buffs, who will, and even people who are moderate horror buffs who will scoff at my maybe not scoff, I think they're all good movies, but I don't have like an expansive in-depth, and it's not a medium that, or a genre that I'm like super into, so it's like, oh, this is definitely the best type of this horror movie, and like this is the best, this, whatever. These are just 5 spooky movies that I really enjoy.
Yeah, and then 5 things to read that I really enjoy. And that's kind of why I went with the label spooky and not horror.
Right.
Because I don't even really know that some of these count as horror necessarily.
For my list, 100% also are not all horror movies. Not even close. I think like 1 technically maybe is specifically.
All right, I'll get us started. So my first recommendation...
Are yours in any order?
No.
Okay, neither are mine. These are also in no particular order.
Okay. So my first recommendation is Through the Woods by Emily Carroll. It's a graphic novel. I say it's a graphic novel. It's more like a graphic collection of short stories.
Yeah.
But it is fantastic. It's super creepy. And similar to like Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, the thing that really makes it is the art.
Cool.
The art is amazing. It's very evocative. And she really like covers the entire page. So there's a lot to soak in. Yeah.
All right. I also want to mention, I think I've recommended at least 1 or 2 of these things on the podcast before, probably at some point or the other, some recently. I know in our prequel for Interview with the Vampire, I mentioned my first movie here. And then one of the other ones I recommended as like, if you follow us on social media, I recommended it as like our movie rec for Children of the Corn. But anyways, so I had other ideas, but these are still I just wanted to do them again for people who don't follow us on social media and that sort of thing. First one is Let the Right One In. Like I said, I mentioned this in the Interview with the Vampire prequel because it is a vampire movie. It's not super duper scary, but it is really creepy and atmospheric. It's still scary. It has its horror moments. It's probably this and one of my later ones are the only 2 that are like the closest to like a pure horror film. But it's really actually more of a character piece about a vampire and their relationship with a child, basically. But it has lots of really creepy moments. It's really interesting because there's tons of subtext. It's a really cool, distinct visual style that feels very European because it is a Norwegian film. There is a remake of it, an American remake starring Chloe Grace Moretz called Let Me In. That's from 2010. This one's from like the early 2000s. And again, it's like Norwegian or it's one of the Norwegian.
I believe that's based on a book.
It may be. I do not know.
I think it is. So we could potentially do that sometime.
Okay. I watched it in college in a film class. It has subtitles. The original does. Because like I said, I don't remember exactly what country it is. But whatever it is, it's not in English. But it doesn't hurt at least I'm pretty sure it's not. It doesn't hurt the experience at all for me. And I've also heard Let Me In is also very good. The remake. Just I haven't seen it, so I can't comment on that. And but I do love Let the Right One In. So. Next book.
All right, so my next recommendation, similar to yours, is not really scary, but it is creepy and atmospheric. And I was absolutely not going to make this list without Wrecking Something by Shirley Jackson.
Okay.
And I want to tell everyone to read We Have Always Lived in the Castle because it's amazing.
We just saw.
I know, we just saw that there's a movie. It was like on Netflix or Hulu
or something,
when we were like scrolling through.
I think it might have been
and
Hulu.
I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, they made a movie or a TV show or something. But yeah. My next one is a classic. Not a horror movie per se, but more of a psychological thriller. Although I'd argue that there are definitely, and I think most people would, there's a few more typical horror elements, and that's The Silence of the Lambs, which is based on a book, and we'll probably do at some point. It's on our list. It's a classic for a reason. It's really well-crafted film. Everybody in it does an amazing job. It has its problematic elements that haven't aged super well in relation to... we don't need to get into the nitty gritty of it here, but it has its issues that haven't aged great. But overall, really effectively, just beautifully made film that's truly like terrifying. For me, also, I do enjoy a good spooky supernatural movie, but because I don't believe in any supernatural stuff, I don't necessarily always find that stuff as scary at times. I mean, I can still be scared in the moment watching like Let the Right One In at certain, but. Things with like criminally insane murderers and stuff is scarier at times to me. It can be. It depends on how it's done. And Silence of the Lambs is just one of the best ones. I haven't seen any of the sequels, so I have no idea if any of those are any good. There's like sequels and prequels and blah, 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 etc. But the classic... Like
you do in Hollywood.
The original Silence of the Lambs is amazing, so... And most people have probably seen that one. The rest of mine are maybe slightly less known, but they're all popular movies. Again, I don't go watch a super obscure... Let the Right One In is probably the most obscure movie on here. So,
all right, well, my next recommendation is a short story collection. So if you're looking for something you can like read a little bit of and like pick up and put down and, have a good like 15-20 minute read and be a little bit spooked, I always recommend short stories for that. And this particular short story collection is all popular young adult authors. So if you like the young adult genre, you will probably be into Slasher Girls and Monster Boys.
Interesting.
It's edited, it's put together by April Genevieve Tuhalke, I believe is how you pronounce her last name. So if that sounds like it's something you would be into, I really enjoyed a lot of the stories that were in it. There were some very, I thought, clever takes on like horror tropes and kind of familiar stories that we've heard a lot. Just kind of fresh takes on things.
Cool. Speaking of clever takes on horror tropes, my next recommendation is arguably not a horror film. It has moments, but it's a comedy, a dark comedy, and that is Cabin in the Woods, The Cabin in the Woods. Saw this movie in theaters with very little expectations going in. I knew Joss Whedon was a producer on it, and I believe it's directed by, now I'm not going to remember his name, a guy who has directed all kinds of stuff. He worked on Buffy. He worked on, oh boy, how can I not remember this guy's name? Great movie. It's like I said, it's kind of a comedy more so than anything else, but it does a really great job dissecting horror movie tropes. It's made much better by, and I'm not even a huge horror movie person, and I wasn't at the time when I saw the movie, but having even just a little bit of knowledge of sort of the tropes of what horror movies do and what they go for and all that sort of stuff makes watching this a much more rewarding experience. Drew Goddard is the name I was trying to recall, who, if you don't know, he's done everything. He was producer on Lost, on The Martian, on the Daredevil TV series. He directed a bunch of the Daredevil. He's directed all kinds of stuff. Directed 4 episodes of The Good Place. He hasn't directed quite as much, but he's a producer and writer on a lot of stuff. And it's just a brilliant satirical takedown of horror movies while being also a love letter to them. It pokes fun, but also very clearly loves horror movies. And the ending is really interesting, and where the twists and turns that the movie goes. I highly recommend if you haven't seen The Cabin in the Woods, don't look up anything about it, because it is one of those things that the sort of first act, or I guess second act twist, is like what makes the movie as interesting and cool and fun as it is. If you go in expecting it to just be kind of like, literally, if you haven't seen a trailer and you just go in thinking this is a horror movie, I already kind of ruined it by saying it's a comedy. It's dynamite. I could not recommend The Cabin in the Woods enough.
My next one is a novel called White is for Witching by Helen Oyeyemi. And similar to some of my other recommendations, it's not scary, but but it is spooky. It's creepy. It's very atmospheric. It's kind of like, it's written in like a spooky, almost stream of consciousness kind of style. If you like Shirley Jackson stuff, like if you've read We've Always Lived in the Castle or like Haunting at Hill House and you enjoyed those, if you're into the trope of like the house is its own character and like the house is alive and it's like eating the family kind of in a metaphorical way, you will like White is for Witching.
My next one is 28 Days Later, which is my favorite zombie movie. Not counting Shaun of the Dead, which is my favorite zombie movie, but is a kind of a different beast. 28 Days Later is a pure, and many will argue it's not actually a zombie movie, but we can talk about it. But it is a pure like horror thriller movie. It's not a comedy. You know, it doesn't have any of those sort of subversive elements. It is just a horror survival zombie movie. It's directed by Danny Boyle, who is a tremendous director who directed one of my favorite movies, Sunshine, among a million other things, Trainspotting, etc. And it was written by Alex Garland, who, if that name doesn't ring a bell, he's written 3 of my favorite movies of the last 10 years, including he wrote Ex Machina. He also directed Ex Machina. He wrote Annihilation, which we're going to do eventually, or adapted Annihilation. He wrote Sunshine, as I mentioned previously, and he wrote Dread, which is the criminally underrated but still kind of cult successful Judge Dredd remake / sequel, whatever. I don't even know technically what it is, which I've never even seen the original Judge Dredd movie with Sylvester Stallone, but this one's from like 2010 or something. It stars Carl Urban, Éomer Bones from the Star Wars or Star Trek remakes as Judge Dredd. It's a very limited scope movie that takes place all in one building. Very like simple storytelling, but just one of the most brilliant like action movies I've seen in a while. He wrote all of those, and I love all those movies. I haven't seen Annihilation. He wrote 28 Days Later. It's one of the creepiest, coolest zombie movies that I arguably think you can watch. My point earlier that some people would argue that they're not zombies is that they're not the undead. Technically, they are people that have a disease, basically like a rabies type of. Right. They have like a rage disease essentially, but they behave like zombies. If you get bit, you turn into like they're basically zombies. It's just going for a more like scientific-ish type of explanation for why they're zombies. They're also fast zombies. They sprint. They're not the like slow lumbering because they have like because they have like a rage disease and not they're not like undead animated corpses. They are fast and they run, which makes it scarier. And there's some just crazy stuff in there. It's also filmed really interesting and kind of slightly vaguely like in a like not found footage, but it kind of looks like it style ish. It's great movie if you're looking for, again, very popular at the time it came out. And there's 2 sequels, at least one. There's a 28 Weeks Later, and I think there might be another one. I don't know, but yeah, that's my next one.
All right. Well, my last recommendation then is not a book. It is a short story. It's actually a Tor.com short. So it's free to read. You can go on, you can search for it. You can go to Tor.com and look for it. I believe it was originally part of their Robots versus Fairies collection. So the short story is called Bread and Milk and Salt by Sarah Bailey. And it's kind of a slow build, but it is worth it. This short story sent like curdles down my spine. Like, I don't even want to say shivers. Like, it made me like curdled up inside. It was so weird and like uncomfortable and creepy. I loved it.
All right. Well, it sounds fascinating. How long is it? You said it's short, but
yeah, it's, I don't know. It took me like maybe 10 or 15 minutes to read.
Oh, okay. So pretty short.
It's not super long.
Yeah. Cool. I might have to check that out. My last recommendation is a recommendation I made on social media after Children of the Corn, like I said, and that is, I just want to recommend it again because I want to talk about it a little bit, is The Invitation, which is on Netflix, or at least was. I think it's still on Netflix. And if you're looking for, this is another one that you shouldn't look anything up about. You shouldn't even watch trailers. If you want a slow burn psychological thriller that is very off-putting and goes in interesting places that you're not really expecting, and is it's a very unique film. I don't know how it's fairly unique film. It's similar. There's some other stuff that's kind of, one of those thrillers that there are other things like it, but I was enthralled the whole time. It's relatively short. It's just about a couple who get invited to a dinner party with some old friends, and stuff starts happening. And again, it's just really interesting. I highly recommend it. It's really well shot, but sort of simply shot film that's just the script's really tight. All of the actors or the performances are just spot on for kind of this weird thing that's going on. I imagine it's similar to movies like Midsommar, which I haven't seen. Mm-hmm. There was another movie. The one I compared it to a little bit. If you liked, is it The Gift?
That one that we saw?
Yeah.
Yes. That
has Jason Bateman or whatever. I think it's Jason Bateman.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I think it's Jason Bateman. Yeah, it's kind of like that-ish, where it's like this thing that seems normal, and then it kind of gets weirder and weirder and weirder. Again, I don't want to go into any detail because, one, it's been a long time since I've seen it, and I don't remember exactly everything that happens, but I remember really enjoying it, and the twists and turns it takes that I wasn't expecting, and it's just really, really good. So, The Invitation, check it out. Again, not a horror movie, per se, more of a thriller mixed with like a mystery drama, interpersonal drama thing, but still, dynamite. Check it out. All right.
Okay.
Those are our recommendations. So you got some good stuff, spooky stuff.
So the last time we did an episode with recommendations was our listener questions.
Oh, yeah,
one that we did at the beginning of the year.
We did like a Q&A.
Yeah, we did a Q&A. And after we did that, I made a note on Facebook, and I made a list of all the stuff we recommended, and I linked out to like Amazon and different places. So I will do that again for this episode. I will work on that tomorrow.
Yeah, whatever.
Today for you guys
when
if you're listening to this.
Yeah.
It's only 10 things, so it shouldn't take me that long. So I'll link all that stuff for you guys, so if you want to go and check any of it out, it'll all be right there for you.
In one place. Cool, perfect. And that's going to do it for this prequel episode of This Film Is Lit. Next week, a week from now on Wednesday, when you're listening to this, the Wednesday before Halloween, we'll be doing something. Hopefully spooky, scary stories to tell in the dark, but maybe something else. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. And when we know for sure,
we'll post it.
We'll post it on social media, so if you want to read along, if you want to watch along, you'll be able to do that.
Yep. All right. And that's it. Until next time, guys, gals, non-binary, and everybody else.
Keep reading books.
Keep watching movies.
And keep being awesome.